Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our first live episode of 2026. Oh, we're starting off the year with fireworks, too. We are. There's so much. You'd think with everybody on vacation that there would be a little bit less drama, but we live in Alberta, and there is always more drama to be had. But it was a nice little break. We took 2 weeks off, as many of you are aware. We did our little Patreon special. I published my very first op-ed on our Substack, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already. I'm going to plug that again at the end of the show. But there's been so much that's been going on. Let's get right into it. Because there's a lot. First thing that we got to talk about is the whole separatist question. There's a little bit of developments that are going on with the separatists and some of the key figures. I'm so sorry. That's not who's supposed to be on the screen. That's who's supposed to be on the screen. Because one of the key figures that we need to talk about is a guy named Jeffrey Rath. He's a lawyer, I'm told. And he is one of the spearheads, one of the figureheads of the entire separatist movement. I can think of other things that are called movements that may or may not be appropriate. But he's one of the key guys. Him and Dennis Modry. There's so much to unpack with this. There's a lot of moving pieces to this separatist thing, and it's gotten a lot of attention over the last little while, especially the last 48 hours, because Donald Trump has once again ramped up his rhetoric in regards to taking over Canada, which I do not like. But that comes in the wake of him taking over Venezuela. So let's get right into it. First of all, the separatists finally got their petition approved. Now, there was a lot of heavy lifting that had to make this happen. Let's be very, very clear about that. And a lot of it was done by the Attorney General of the province of Alberta and the Premier of the province of Alberta. Two major things happened. The first thing that happened was originally the count of signatures that were required for a referendum. It was very, very high. You would have to have a very well organized campaign that had a lot of support. Let's say they could get one in, I don't know, every 5 Albertans to sign the petition, like maybe the Forever Canadian movement did. I can't remember if it was 1 in 5 or 1 in 10. I'll take full ownership of that. It was a huge number. They got almost 500,000 people to sign the thing, which was a very big deal, and very hard to do. There was a lot of people that stepped up to make sure that the Forever Canadian petition went forward. And there's been developments on that too. Thomas Lukasik originally had said that he wanted the question to be posed in the legislature. And really, that was a clever strategic move if it had panned out, because it would have forced UCP MLAs to basically state what their allegiance was in the legislature, where they've sworn oaths to the king. So saying, I would like to separate from the crown would be dissonant. It's not going to. It looks like it's not going to go that way. It looks like it's going to go to a referendum question. So that's the Forever Canadian piece. But getting back to the separatists, it was a very high bar to reach. So Danielle Smith generously said, "What if I lowered that bar for you by a lot?" And she lowered the number of signatures required to start a petition. And so they put their question forward, and the chief elections officer said, "Whoa. I'm not sure that that's a legal question. I don't think that's a legal question. It violates the charter. So I don't think you're allowed to do that. I'm going to ask a judge." And while that was before the courts, Danielle Smith in the UCP said, "Well, what if we just change the laws again?" And so they changed the laws again to allow for unconstitutional referendum questions in a non-binding capacity. So in theory, Danielle Smith in the UCP could, if the separatists get their referendum with 51%, they could say, okay, well, cute result, guys, but we're not going to do anything with it. They could, in theory, do that. But there's so much more to this. And one of the things that we have to talk about is the travel tour that Jeffrey Rath and Dennis Modry are engaging in. So, for anybody who's unfamiliar, with no authority whatsoever, other than appointed to them by the Alberta Prosperity Project, Dennis Modry and Jeffrey Rath have been touring the United States and apparently South America. Gosh, I hope they didn't go to Venezuela. Um, reading from the article on the screen here, Rath said that he and Dr. Dennis Modry, APP's CEO, APP is Alberta Prosperity Project. There's so many APPs these days. Were in the American capital last Tuesday, meeting with officials of the Department of State that discussed how the U.S. could support Alberta independence. One of the things we'd really like to see is U.S. recognition of Alberta as an independent country immediately upon a successful referendum, Rath said, reiterating what he's told the National Post in recent months. So that's fun. And I gotta play a clip. I know, so out of character. And this is a bit of an interesting clip because this clip comes compliments of probably not compliments. It's on our YouTube. It comes compliments of Rachel Parker, David Parker's wife. She started her podcast back up again, and one of the first guests that she had on was none other than Mr. Rath, who had some thoughts about how things could go that he wanted to share.
We actually met in a skiff of all things, but that was interesting. But the people that we're meeting with go directly from our meetings to the Oval Office. So that's the level that we're meeting at. We were at it for several hours, going through all of the ways in which the United States government could support Alberta independence when the timing was right. They are very enthusiastic about Alberta becoming an independent country. I mean, the one thing that we all fervently believe and have in common is that the government in Ottawa and the landlocking of Alberta's resources is being done by Ottawa at the behest of the Communist Chinese. And the Americans, see it within their national interest, both under the Monroe Doctrine that's been around forever and their new national security strategy to support Alberta independence and freeing the third largest oil field in the world from control by the Communist Chinese. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about is that the reason that the Chinese want to keep Alberta oil and gas landlocked is because they don't want Japan and South Korea to have a steady and stable supply of oil and gas coming out of the third largest oil field in the world, right? In terms of why it is that the United States is so supportive of a free and independent Alberta. So we were excited about that. We talked about a West Coast pipeline being one of the things that Alberta would like to see immediately upon independence. And that would be a pipeline going from Alberta through Idaho or Montana, Idaho, and either Washington or Oregon to the West Coast to supply that Asian market. And the Americans are very supportive of that. So we were talking to the U.S. government about support for our pensioners and converting Alberta pensions at par from Canadian dollars to US dollars, things like that. We're also talking about doing a feasibility study, which we're going to get working on right away, to establish a $500 billion line of credit for the country of Alberta, so that immediately upon a successful referendum result, Alberta could trigger a $500 billion line of credit so that when we negotiate with Ottawa, we'll be negotiating from a position of strength and not from weakness. So we want to be able to sidestep, what we see the inevitable response from Ottawa will be to Alberta becoming an independent country, which is to try to screw with us as much as they can on the fiscal and monetary side. So, I mean, if we're backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. Treasury, collateralized with the Alberta oil field, oil and gas resources, we've got no reason not to be able to succeed in our negotiations with Ottawa and successfully removing Alberta from Canada and becoming an independent country.
Now, there's so much to unpack there. Let's start our way. We'll go backwards to the front. The first piece that I love is the line of credit. $500 billion line of credit backed by the United States. Hey, I wonder what we would have to give in return for that. Well, in other interviews, Mr. Rath has been very clear. We just have to say we would put all of the oil sands, all of Alberta's natural resources against that line of credit, basically selling all of our resources in Alberta for a $500 billion line of credit to the United States. So that's super fun. Pipelines, talking about pipelines going down through the States. It seems like more and more people are starting to realize that the odds of a pipeline getting through BC, especially without the endorsement of the First Nations folks who live there, the odds are not great. And so now everybody's like, what if we go through the States? The pension, the notion that Alberta would be able to move the existing pension dollars held by the federal government, or the Canada Pension Plan, I should say, which do belong to every individual who's contributed to it, let's be clear, and get parity for the US dollar. That's bold. I mean, we're talking about the U.S. government just handing over literally hundreds of billions of dollars for free. Makes perfect sense to me. But my favorite part of the whole thing is you see the whole reason why Alberta has been landlocked. And again, while technically we don't have any borders that align with open water, we've got tons of pipelines. We've got tons of rail. We've got tons of different ways that we get our product to market. So landlocked is a bit of a hyperbolic word to use under the circumstances. But the notion that the reason why the federal government has been pumping the brakes on pipelines and other sorts of development for the last few years doesn't have to do with logistics or lack of private interest or respecting treaty rights or dealing with the problems of unceded territories in BC. It has nothing to do with that. It's all because the Chinese government told the federal government that they could not allow Alberta to ship product to market because they don't want Japan and South Korea having a stable supply. I don't know. News to me. I'm not a speculator of the Asian commodities markets, I guess. So I guess I'll have to ask an expert about that. But here's the thing that you have to understand. And this is where it's going to get wild. And I'm sure going to get a copyright strike on this video, because it's not just Jeffrey Rath who's talking about the importance of Alberta in Donald Trump's grand plan for the United States national security. This is from November, and now I'm going to make you listen to, of all people, one of them is Steve Bannon.
What President Trump's argument to Canada is, and they just kind of blew it off, but when he talks about defense, what he's making the point on the Arctic is that Canada is kind of like Ukraine, right? The Chinese and the Russians are up there, and they see the undefended northern territories of Canada. They're going to take a bite. The Canadians got to understand something.
They already are.
They're going to intrude in your territory, and they're going to dare you to do anything about it, and you're going to turn to Big Brother. Go ahead.
We're getting Alberta is the linchpin. So when Trump says Canada's going to be the 51st state, he's speaking, he's vamping, he's having a little fun. But what he's really saying, because I know a lot of the guys in charge of the Albertan separatist movement or their prosperity movement, Alberta, they've already met twice now with the State Department. The Albertans are ready to vote in the next 6 months. They're getting out of the Canadian Union. They're going to become an independent state, independent country. We're going to recognize them, and that's going to put them on the pathway to becoming the 51st state. And here's why that's important. Alberta has a bevy of untapped rare earth minerals. They have the world's largest geothermal energy sources. They have some of the world's largest natural gas and oil deposits. So when Trump says Canada is becoming the 51st state, he's really talking about Alberta, and that's important because that's a gateway to the Arctic. Greenland is another gateway to the Arctic. So when we talk about hemispheric defense, we're not just talking about Latin America. We're talking about the polar regions too, Steve, and how they all link together.
Now, we're going to have so much fun with this next little bit here. That was Steve Bannon, and a policy analyst out of the United States who does a lot of work with Turning Points USA. So let's be clear. The credibility, it's maybe questionable. He knew to correct himself and talk about it's not just the Alberta separatists, Alberta prosperity. So he's clearly, Alberta politics is fairly niche. And for him to be talking about the Alberta Prosperity Project and correct himself with the vernacular, this is a guy who's somewhat familiar with what Jeffrey Rath and what Dr. Dennis Modry are trying to pursue. That's important. I don't want to minimize that, but I do have a question about his comments about making sure that the U.S. has access to the Arctic, because like the Ukraine, it's a gateway to the Arctic, and Greenland is a gateway to the Arctic. And the United States, we picture it here in this map of North America. The United States, oh, look at them down there on the bottom there. They're all by themselves. They have no access to the Arctic, don't you see? If only there was some way that the United States had some territory that was available to them in the Arctic. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that mean that they wouldn't have to invade Alberta or take over Alberta and then I guess go through the Northwest Territories and Yukon? If only there was a simpler, more direct path for the Americans to have territory on the Arctic shores. If only. That was fun for me. But all of this is, and this is the part that people should probably be paying attention to, Donald Trump is running a very real narrative, and it is being backed by conservative talking heads in the United States on some of the biggest conservative media networks in the United States about the idea, hey, we'll get Alberta first, and then we'll go from there. And this is really starting to become clear that a lot of the effort that is being put into getting Albertans to sign off on a separation referendum isn't actually, it doesn't have that much to do with making Alberta great again. It has more to do with destabilizing the entire country. Nowhere is that more evident than in the social media of some of the biggest accounts that are pushing this thing. There's one called Alberta Separation, and they're not talking about, in this post right here, they're not talking about, hey, Alberta Separation is our account. We're all about Alberta separation. We want Alberta to celebrate. No, what they're saying is also Quebec should separate. So at a certain point, all of the people who think that these big pie in the sky promises that are being made to them by people who stand to benefit from them, maybe they should think about, if it sounds too good to be true, maybe it is. Maybe the pipelines aren't going to spontaneously materialize, especially now that the whole Venezuela thing is the thing. It's going to take a while for them to ramp up production to what the U.S. would like them to have. And it all depends on how long the U.S. stays in that space. But they've already stayed longer than they did in Panama. So do with that what you will in regards to the leader stuffs. But it's something that Alberta should be paying attention to, because the notion that the United States is going to match pension dollars at parity to the US dollar is bonkers. The idea that Albertans should use all of the natural resources of the province to underwrite a $500 billion line of credit is bonkers. But the petition has been issued, and it's important to take a look at some of the things that they have to do. So the signature collection period is January 3rd to May 2nd, 2026. The number of signatures that they need to collect is 177,732, which is only 10% of the total number of votes cast in the 2023 provincial general election. Now, I want to be clear again, real quick, about something. This has been ruled to be an unconstitutional referendum question. The referendum question is, do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be part of Canada and become an independent state? The judge did rule on this. Justice Feasby did say this is an unconstitutional referendum question. That's one of the reasons why the UCP had to change the law in order to get it past the goalposts. And that hasn't been not noticed by a few folks. This press release came out just on the beginning of the weekend here, and definitely want to take a sec to highlight a couple of things in regards to it. This is from the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation. And it reads, I'm just going to read the whole thing because it deserves to be read in its entirety. No separation of Alberta from Canada can occur without First Nations consent. This is treaty land. This is the law. Despite this, today the chief electoral officer followed the blatantly unconstitutional law passed by the UCP and approved a separatist petition in violation of Treaty Number 8. This petition will invite foreign interference and economic, social, and legal harm on all Canadians who live in Alberta, but especially all First Nations. This was approved while the courts were closed. They reopened Monday. Tonight, and again, this was released on January 2nd, 2026. Tonight, we have filed a statement of claim in the Alberta Court of King's Bench against Alberta, Canada, and the Chief Electoral Officer for failing to diligently implement the treaty and for breaching the treaty. On Monday, we will file an urgent injunction to pause the petition to avoid the foreseeable harms that will result from this petition. We all invite all First Nations and Canadians to support us. So, this has caused a bit of an uproar because the Alberta, again, it's one of those areas where the headline that shows up on social media doesn't match the headline that shows up on the news article. And then certain folks like the Alberta Prosperity Project decide to jump on it and jump up and down. So Global did put out a social media post. That said, I believe it was Global. Yeah, it was Global Edmonton. Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation blocks Alberta separatist petition in court. Now, it was issued on the 2nd. The courts are closed. They have filed for an injunction. The courts reopen tomorrow. So it remains to be seen, but their intent is clear. And a judge has already ruled on the constitutionality of the question. This was, again, Justice Feasby. So it's not a big reach to say that they will likely get their injunction. The courts can be surprising, so we'll see what we see. But it's not a big reach to speculate that this late on a Sunday. Here I am speculating as such. But the other thing that is important to keep in mind is, as much as the Alberta Prosperity Project was like, whoa, we didn't get an injunction, we can still do our petition, it's all good and fun. There is a critically important part of that ruling by Justice Feasby that I do absolutely want to take a second to highlight, because it's the ball game. It really is the ball game, and people need to understand and appreciate that. There's a lot of armchair legal experts on the Twitter machines and on the Facebook machines. Interestingly, not very many on the Instagram or the Blue Sky. Wonder what's up with that. But on those other two platforms, there's a lot of armchair legal experts, and they like to say, "Oh, they ceded their land. They can't say no." Well, judge ruled on that. Justice Feasby was very, very clear. Perhaps an independent Alberta would adopt provisions like the Constitution Act 1982, Section 35, and recognize and affirm treaty rights. But for the reasons explained above, Alberta cannot succeed to the numbered treaties without the consent of First Nations. Moreover, this decision has concluded that the transformation of provincial and territory boundaries into international borders would contravene the numbered treaties by significantly impairing the exercise of treaty rights by First Nations. So let's be crystal clear. I'm going to use the joke again. If you're a regular little listener to the show, you know the joke I'm going to use. I'm going to use it again. The only way that Alberta can secede or leave or become our own country, I would not want to be a resident of the country of Alberta, and I'm born and raised here. But anyways, the only way that Alberta can do that is if they get the permission of all of the treaty signatories that cover Alberta, which is, again, for the cheap seats, all of Alberta. So the short version of that is all that Jeffrey Rath, who's making promises of pipelines and pensions and $500 billion against revenue and land. And that is also treaty land, by the way. If you just trust the Jeffrey this time and all of his friends in the Alberta Prosperity Project, just trust him this time. As we renegotiate the treaties, if you could just trust the settlers this time, we'll do you honest. We will. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. And the judges ruled on it. So I don't know what we're talking about here. But at the very, very least, as we're talking about all of these things, Mr. Rath gets to travel and nicely to southern locales during the colder seasons of Alberta, which is, I'm told, something of an Albertan tradition. Moving on from there, we got to talk about this. The Alberta update. For anybody who's unfamiliar with the Alberta update, it is a program, I'll say generously, that is paid for if you live in the province of Alberta and you pay some taxes. It's paid for by you. It's kind of like your province or premier, but they put it up on YouTube, and former UCP MLA and News Morning host Bruce McAllister, bestie of Danielle Smith, they did their whole shows together on the Western Standard. He hosts it. You pay for it. And then they put it up on YouTube with some reasonably high production values. And they did their year end. And there's a lot to talk about. And let's start with, since we just finished with separatism, let's start with their little bit on separatism.
I want to ask you about separation. And this could change literally from the time we do this to the time that it airs. You've got probably 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, maybe 5 Albertans that says, let's go. We've had it with Ottawa. You've got probably 1 in 3 Albertans that says, never, not a chance. We love our country. You've got to govern for everybody.
Yeah.
And so you won't be leading charges either way. How do you deal with those discussions?
Well, I am dismayed to see that because of the way we've been treated by Ottawa, the level of sentiment towards independence is as high as I've ever seen it. I've seen numbers ranging from 32% all the way up to 37%. That's a huge number of people who have given up hope on Canada. I haven't given up hope on Canada, and I think Canada can work.
Ottawa's the worst, but I haven't given up hope. But I love the framing of the question to begin with. There are some people in Alberta who feel this way. There are also some people in Alberta who feel the other way. Obviously, with people feeling 2 different ways, you, as the leader of a province, you can't take a position on that. You can't lead any charges now, can you? Because that might be mistaken for, what's the word I'm looking for? Leadership. It's bonkers. It's bonkers. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. It gets so much more interesting, because there was a follow-up question that came a little bit later on where Danielle Smith was asked by Bruce about what she sees happening for the next year. And she used some I don't know if it was an intentional or unintentional, but either way, it's very revealing language.
Next year is, I think, the year that we see if Canada has realized that they've got to start building again, they've got to start generating revenue again, they've got to start investing in resources again, and I think next year is the proving year.
Did you hear it? This is all of the things that Canada needs to do. They have to start building projects. They have to, as if Alberta is not still a part of Canada, which we are. But it speaks volumes as to how Smith views her role as a premier in Confederation in Canada. It is oppositional. It is outside of the rest of Canada, because this is what they have to do. Not what we have to do. Not what we have to do as a nation. This is what Canada has to do. This is what they have to do to get back in my good graces, is the subtext of that. And it's something that people really, really should be paying attention to as Danielle Smith continues junkets down to the States, and as she sends her ministers on junkets down to the States, and as Donald Trump ramps up his rhetoric. These are the sorts of things that Albertans should very much be paying attention to. But don't worry, all the greatest hits were still there.
We did our when we did do our call and had a special tax credit for skilled trades. We were trying to attract more welders and electricians, but it was never intended to be Tim Hortons and McDonald's and A&W employees, because those are the jobs that young kids are looking for to get their first experience in the job market. And so when we were looking at the very, very large number of temporary foreign workers that are in those positions, and seeing that our youth unemployment rate had spiked up to almost 20%, That's what we started hearing at the town halls is, wait a minute, my son, my daughter, my grandson, my granddaughter, they've put out dozens of resumes and haven't even gotten a call back. What's going on here? That's one part of the problem. The other one, when we were talking about education, we had one of our school boards was talking about reducing its number of student spaces by 14,000 in 2022. That was what their projections were about where their enrollment was going. Fast forward 3 years, 85,000 new students in our schools, which has prompted us to do an $8.6 billion school build. That's what happens when you have a large number of people coming all at once. You just can't build schools fast enough. People often writing in about how they can't find a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a doctor. That's one of the other pressures you have. We fortunately have a great construction industry that really listened to our call, build more houses, build more rental property, because we were seeing home prices spike and rent spike. And when you look at the issue around food affordability, that is really caused by the pressure of inflation being driven by a huge out of control population growth. I mean, I think everything that you're seeing pressure on has been exacerbated by the fact that we have had an immigration policy that hasn't matched our ability to absorb the newcomers.
Everything you're seeing pressure on has been exacerbated by these immigrants. Oh, this unchecked immigration, except none of that really bears out. It may be a very small factor in some of the things that she listed off. But when we're talking about the fact that A&W or Tim Hortons wants to hire adults and can do so using subsidy programs, that's not, that's capitalism. That's the company can get somebody for the same price for their bottom line who is a mature grown adult. That's who they're going to choose. That's capitalism. That's free market capitalism at its best right there. And so it's fascinating that part Danny is ignoring. The food prices piece. There have been many studies. There was a recent class action lawsuit done about the fixing of food prices across Canada. So again, the problem is not the immigrants, it's the unchecked, unfettered, unregulated capitalism that's at play in these environments. And I'm not against capitalism. I want to be very, very clear on that. I believe in well-regulated capitalism. I think that there's a very strong argument for well-regulated capitalism. But the things that Danny's listing off are not a result of that. They're a result of the opposite. She talks about housing. She talks about healthcare. And it's wild to me that they would play that clip, or they would keep that piece in her little year-end interview when the social media sphere, the proper media sphere, has been flooded with discussions on why healthcare is actually failing. And at the end of the day, it boils down to governments fell asleep at the wheel as we had an aging population, period. And we're going to have a conversation with an ER physician, hopefully in the next week or so, that I'm very, very excited for, because he had the inside track on a lot of these things, not just as an emergency room physician, but as a policymaker. So stay tuned for that, because that's going to be quite the spicy meatball. But again, it's taking profoundly complex issues, and instead of saying there's a lot of factors at play here, we really, really should have a nuanced conversation about that. It's let's go to the playbook. And there is a playbook. When you make all of your problems about the other, the immigrants, the trans folks, the scary people that are different, when you make all of your problems about people like that, that comes from a very, very specific playbook. And it's one that no responsible politician should be comfortable going to, because it doesn't lead to any good places. But speaking of the othering and the weaponizing of fear, boy, did Danny lean into it when she got to the trans policies, anti-trans policies.
You have used the notwithstanding clause a few times. You've taken a lot of flack for that, and you've also gotten a lot of support. I think about the teacher strike, some of the trans bills. Is it hard to use that legislation, or are you just so determined and so principled that, you know, we have to do this?
You know, I never thought that. I remember people used to ask me about that when I first came in, and I couldn't really foresee of a circumstance where I would use the notwithstanding clause. But then I saw that the activists are going after the kids. And it's one thing for a person to make a decision about what their life choices are as an adult, whether it's surgery, whether it's medical intervention, whether it's changing their name. But when you're a 10-year-old child, you're too young to make a decision that might have a permanent impact on your ability to have kids. That's why we knew we had to stop the use of puberty blockers for minors 15 years of age and younger, stop surgeries until a person has become an adult and understands the consequences of what that means. It also meant that we had to make sure that parents were not going to be separated from what was going on with their kids. We'd heard stories of maybe well-meaning adults referring kids to gender clinics without the parents' knowledge, being called a different name without their parents' knowledge. And that's a devastating thing to do to a child, to separate them from their parents that way, and a devastating thing for parents too. And then the increasing stories that we heard about the danger of born male athletes competing in women and girls sports. We just knew that we might have been a little bit ahead of the conversation, but when the CAS report came out in the United Kingdom, when you see that the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, now New Zealand and the United States are all going down the same pathway as we are, saying, you know what, this medical intervention has not been tested. We don't know what the long-term consequences are. The watchful waiting has been the previous way that you deal with kids who have this kind of gender confusion, and we're going back to that because we just think it's going to preserve all the choices for kids. The reason we had to use a notwithstanding clause in that case was because the court struck down one of our laws. And when you see how long it takes for a final decision to be made in a court, it could take 4 or 5 years. And we just thought the harm that could potentially come to the number of kids in the meantime, we just thought, we know we're on side with where our public is, and that's the role of an elected official. You got to make decisions. The role of the court is to offer their interpretation of it, but too often I think the court has overstepped and not given the proper deference to the legislatures.
Whoa. All of a sudden, the role of an elected official is to take a position on a contentious issue? Somebody should tell Danny from like 5 minutes ago that. And Bruce, and by the way, I love the physicality of Bruce's interview style. Are you just so determined and so principled with the almost flexing that he did there? There's so much to unpack in that clip, and all of it's bullshit. It's fear-mongering. It feeds into the conspiracy theories and the lies that exist on social media. And there's no evidence of the vast majority of the things that Danny talked about. Activists going after kids. And again, this is one of those places where talking about this issue in this simplistic a manner is harmful. It's demonstrably harmful. The notion that someone can convince someone to choose a gender identity is insane. And it suggests that, if you just, you can make anyone trans, you can just go ahead and make anyone gay. And it's simply not true. The reality is human sexuality and human gender is a spectrum. This is well documented and established by science. If you have a problem with that, I'm very, very sorry, but reality doesn't care. That's just the reality of things. And we've done many episodes on this show where we've talked about the fact that it is way more complex than just a binary state. And anybody who's trying to present it as a binary state is doing a disservice to the conversation. The idea where she says 10-year-olds are accessing permanent interventions is simply not true. The fact that she talks about stopping surgeries for people under the age of 18, they simply don't happen. There's been investigative journalism that's looked at this, and the numbers of top surgeries has been, over the course of 2 years, was all in the tens. And we don't know why. We don't know why those surgeries were performed. We don't know how many of those top surgeries were done for gender-affirming care, and we don't know how many were done for gender-affirming care but not gender-changing. There's conditions where young boys can develop breasts due to hormone imbalances, and mastectomies are done for those kids so that you don't have boys who are boys and they identify as boys. They would very much like to be boys without breasts, and they get surgery for it. We don't know how many of that was gender affirming for the born gender, the assigned gender, and how many of those tens of surgeries over the course of 2 years were for any sort of gender transition care. We don't know. But regardless, we're talking about tens of top surgeries. In regards to bottom surgeries, this is another of the great lies of this whole conversation. Bottom surgeries don't happen unless you're an adult anyways. So it's more spin. It's more fear that is designed to make people afraid and to justify positions that aren't based in science. Now, I do love the fact that she did admit the reason why they used the notwithstanding clause was because the court said, hey, these policies will actually do harm. She didn't quite say that part. That was in the injunction that was issued. The judge who heard the injunction case said, yes, the balance of probabilities demonstrates that the policies that the UCP have advanced will cause real and permanent harm to vulnerable youth. She left that part out. But as we'll see in just a second, she's very good at reframing things to fit a certain story. But she did say that the reason why they used the notwithstanding clause was because the courts struck down one of their laws. Now, they didn't struck down the law. They issued an injunction while the courts would rule on the constitutionality of the law. And again, kicking off the new year, I want to reiterate that the use of the notwithstanding clause on any of the trans bills is a tacit admission that those laws violate the charter, period. It's an admission. There's nothing more to it. Every time Danielle Smith uses the notwithstanding clause, she's saying, I don't want to follow the charter. But we also got into the media, and those media folks are just terrible.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the media, and I don't want to make this a rip on the mainstream media segment. You'd never do that, I would, but we shouldn't. We're both from that industry. Yeah. But the point is, that was labeled a book ban by a lot of people in the media for a long time. It was never that.
No.
And eventually the right message did get to people, and sadly, the images had to be shared about what was in these materials. How do you combat that as the leader of the government in the province, that when you see continually things out there that you're saying, woo, that's not what we're doing?
Well, it was disappointing, and it was just one school board that had put out the list that they were going to take out. So it was the school board that was intending to take those books out. And my understanding is that they used AI to look for certain words in their library. And that was, again, never the intention. I don't want to get too graphic on it, but we went online and said, graphic images, here's what we're trying to take out. And I think that anyone who went and looked, a reasonable person would say that you should do that. But we also accept that there are also advocacy groups that want to make a point and want to imply that what we're doing is taking it further than what we ever intended. But the joke I've made is, look, if people know that there's sex scenes in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and they go to the library and read that, then, well, maybe they might pick up a little philosophy along the way, read a little bit about capitalism and entrepreneurship. Maybe there's an upside to that.
Okay.
Oh, they could learn about that capitalism that causes the food prices to be high and the companies to hire adults instead of young people looking for jobs. Oh, that didn't go particularly well. But let's be crystal clear. And this brings us to another segment of my favorite part of the show, Danielle Smith Lies. It absolutely was a book ban. The first iteration of the law was very, very clear. It included not graphic images. It included books. It included any of the words, any of the descriptions of any of the things. And people raised the alarm and said, hey, I think maybe you're swinging a little bit harder than perhaps you mean to. And they said, no, this is exactly what we mean to do. And then school boards started to say, okay, then we'll follow the law that you have crafted. And accidentally, some lists of books were maybe released via certain social media outlets. And that turned into them saying, whoa, we didn't mean the word books, we meant the picture books. And this is where we see some more clever wordplay, because let's be clear, the books that Danielle Smith targeted, the books that were on that list, have been determined by curriculum experts to be appropriate for the ages that they are targeted for. That's very, very important. Nobody has ever argued these books should be in front of preschool kids or kindergarten kids or kids who can't grasp the content. But for kids who are dealing with the same kinds of issues that these books represent, they're totally age appropriate. But what Danielle Smith and the UCP decided to do repeatedly was play the spin game. And we saw this with Demetrius Nicolaides and his minor children comments, because I don't know what child wouldn't be a minor, and I don't know what minor wouldn't be a child, because we haven't gotten to the Eastern Slopes stuff yet. But it's that wordplay. It's that game. So Danielle Smith and the little press secretaries, they all got together, and there was what if we called these books that are award-winning graphic novels that are age appropriate for the correct ages? This has been debated and resolved by experts. What if we just called these books pornography? And this is where, again, Danielle Smith accidentally tells a little bit of the truth, because Bruce it's never about banning. It was never about banning books. It was never about that, was it, Danny? Danny, oh, no, it was never about banning books at all. Unless, of course, we go to the UCP AGM, and then it absolutely was about banning.
And speaking of taking a stand, how about taking a stand for our children? Yeah. As Premier, I want to assure every parent and grandparent here today that under no circumstances will we back down from defending Alberta's children. And that means banning graphic sexual images from our school libraries, full stop. And it also means using the Charter's notwithstanding clause to protect our children by restricting puberty blockers for minors and prohibiting gender reassignment surgery until the child reaches adulthood.
Oh, look at her smiling. She liked that part of the UCP AGM. They were standing up and clapping, not booing, when she said that she didn't necessarily support the separatism thing yet. She did like that part of the AGM. But she says right there, it's banning those images. And again, this is where the government of Alberta is appointing itself arbiter of what is emotionally and developmentally development for kids, because they don't like it because someone somewhere in AirG said it made them feel icky. That's not a good reason to rob vulnerable kids of supports. If you don't like those conversations, you're not obliged to enter them. But robbing kids who are dealing with incredibly difficult issues of supports that allow them to see themselves, it's just wrong. And speaking of things that are just wrong,
the recent ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada in a 5-4 decision that there should be no minimum sentence for anybody possessing child pornography is case in point.
It is. And the thing that is so, really underscores in that case is that it was a 5-4 decision. So when people say, oh, well, the court's decided, well, the court is often split
all 5
itself.
judges appointed by Justin Trudeau.
Precisely. One more reason why we may have to start looking at how we can have more role in appointing judges, particularly in our courts here.
Judges, they're the worst. And if anybody gets only a slight majority, like, I don't know, what was it, 52% of the initial UCP leadership race, they've got no business claiming that they have any authority. The hypocrisy gets to be pretty clear pretty quick, doesn't it? Because again, here we have Danielle Smith and Bruce McAllister. You can tell that they have a little drinking game about this at the office, where it's like somebody mentions a judge, and if they happen to be a federal judge that was appointed during Justin Trudeau's tenure as prime minister, Justin Trudeau appointed that judge. Oh, everybody take a sip of your schnapps. It's more undermining the courts. It's more invalidating the courts. It was a majority decision. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. If it's a majority decision, the reasons for the decision are published, the reasons against the decision are published. And anybody who actually wants to weigh in on any of the issues that are in a split decision of any kind should probably do themselves a favor and actually read the reasons why the supporting and the dissenting judges made their decisions. Because it's not as simple as Bruce has presented it there. We've talked about it many times on shows before, and I'm running late anyways, so we're going to plow right through that and get to the next big piece of news. We'll give you a little bit of break from hearing, it's only a short break, but from hearing Danny pontificate, because she gave us so much material over the last 2 weeks. It's bonkers. But one of the big things that we got to talk about, Rebecca Schulz, she's got the sign. She's getting back on track. Rebecca Schulz resigned. She resigned, She resigned as Minister of Parks and Environment, and I think it was oil development was the third part of the portfolio. I'm not entirely sure. It was very confusing. It was hard to tell because she would do all of these announcements about oil and gas while she was Parks and coal while she was Parks and Environment. It was very hard to follow. Anyway, she's resigned. She released her resignation. It was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, and it was vague. The letter that she published on social media, the paragraph, I've spent the better part of 16 years in politics as a campaigner, staffer, an MLA, and a minister, and I've truly enjoyed every minute of it. However, timing is everything, and in politics, it is. Timing is everything in life and in politics, and it is time for me to seek new opportunities for my career. I've offered the Premier my resignation as Minister of Environment Protected Areas as of January 2nd, 2026. I will continue to serve the people of Calgary, Shaw, and support our incredible United Conservative team in the legislature until May 2026. And that's fueled a lot of speculation. And we're going to get to some of that speculation in a minute, but it's fueled a lot of speculation as to, does this mean there's an early election coming? Probably not. And this is the thing with the early election thing. There's a lot of people who are like, early election, that'd be so great. We could get rid of them so much faster. But as you'll hear in a couple minutes, that does not seem to be the order of the day for Danny and co. And this is something that's been reiterated by her right-hand man, Rob Anderson, where he said quite clearly, we have a mandate, we have fixed election dates, we'll be sticking to those. Thank you very much. Now, yes, believe you me, I know it's been said. Danielle Smith, the relationship with the truth is a little fluid. So she could change her mind in a week. I don't think she's going to. There's a very long list of reasons for that. But let's get to what's happening in the meantime, because that will get us to the press conference. Danielle Smith appointed Grant Hunter as the new Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. He was sworn in the very day after her resignation took effect. And yes, it is that Grant Hunter from the Coots blockade. Nothing says, I want to teach my kids values. Like, I'm going to take the grandkids down to a highway to be part of an illegal border blockade that is costing billions of dollars in revenue, to teach them the importance of standing up for freedom and liberty. That's the Grant Hunter, the grandkids at the Coots blockade. Grant Hunter, that's the one who's now Minister of Parks and in other things. But there's a neat little rabbit hole that we went down here. And we're just going to indulge ourselves for a second here, because when we saw the tweet that Grant put up, where he was talking about his new appointment, we couldn't help but notice the Twitter handle. And the Twitter handle is Grant Hunter UCP 3, which is fascinating because there's a lot of people who have the same names. There's probably a couple of dozen Grant Hunters on the Twitter machine. But how many Grant Hunter UCPs are there that we would have to go all the way to Grant Hunter UCP 3? And it's literally right there in his account, Grant Hunter UCP 3. And what's also really interesting is he only joined in March of 2025, which struck us as odd because we had seen pictures of Grant Hunter's social media posts in the past. And it turns out there was a Grant Hunter UCP that was created in June 2015, but it hasn't been posted on since 2022. And the reason for that might be alluded to in the last tweet from Grant Hunter UCP, which was, "Congratulations to Premier-elect Danielle Smith on becoming the leader of the UCP and Premier of Alberta. I look forward to learning more about her vision for Alberta. I am 100% committed to a unified Conservative movement. Great days are ahead for Alberta." And perhaps the reason why that account got deactivated was because there was a new dirge of press secretaries who came in, and you didn't get a press secretary if you endorsed Travis Toews. Or at least you didn't get a press secretary, you don't endorse Travis Toews, and you weren't one of the ministers that got chosen to be one of the lucky ministers. And there's some fascinating familiar faces on there. There's also a lot of people who aren't in government anymore. So yeah, it's just a fun little detour on the Grant Hunter, Rebecca Schulz rabbit hole. But that brings us to the press conference, because Danny went and had herself a press conference after the announcement of Grant Hunter being the new minister, and they appointed a new caucus whip. And a lot of the big heady issues of the day came forward. One of them has to do with the questions around recall. A lot of people were prepared to see, and there were rumors of swirling that there was going to be changes to the recall legislation in the last legislative session right before Christmas. It never materialized. And the rumor machine was saying they decided to change it at the last minute because they realized that they would piss off a lot of their base and it would turn into a whole thing, and they didn't want to deal with that. They also realized that most of the recalls aren't going to get anywhere near the threshold to actually trigger the recall vote and then the by-election and then the so they're sitting pretty comfortable right now. But they were asked about the recall, and we now have a pretty good idea of when those changes are probably going to happen.
I know in the past you have mentioned that your government could potentially be looking at amending recall legislation. As recalls are ramping up against members of your government, could you potentially make any of those changes this year, and if so, when?
Well, the way the legislation is currently written, there is an exclusion window, 12 months after an election and 12 months before an election. And so that exclusion window would begin in October of 2026. So I would anticipate if there's going to be changes, that would be the time we would make them.
I mean, we're saving the clip for sure. And she was not committal by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems to be that it will be October of 2026 that Albertans can expect changes to the recall, which again underscores it's not terribly likely that we're going to see an early election, because then they wouldn't, if they lost it, they wouldn't be able to make those changes, and the NDP would probably just toss the whole bill. Other issues came up, though, as promised. The Grassy Mountain Eastern Slopes question came up.
And do you support the idea of a mine such as Grassy Mountain in the part of the in this part of the eastern slope of the Rockies?
Well, it was a mine that my understanding was in operation back in the 50s. And when 4 advanced mine projects were declared to be able to continue going through the process, they were one of them. So I'll allow them to continue to go through the process. But what I heard was that greenfield development on Category 2 lands was something that Albertans were very reluctant to give approval to, which is why we've changed the policy and we bought back the leases and the freehold on those lands so that they don't get developed.
Now, some important context. First of all, I'm not sure what they were doing in 1950 with that mine has anything to do with it being an advanced project, because it was shut down for decades. And if we're going to talk about things that we were doing in the 50s and that somehow makes them all acceptable, boy, do we have a list that we're going to have to work our way through, because there's a lot of things that we did in the 50s that weren't so great. Ironically, some of the things that we were doing in the 50s in regards to embracing things like vaccination, we were doing better with. So there's that. But it's also important to highlight that what is the issue that's being skirted to some degree there is Danielle Smith and Brian Jean promised everybody there would be no new open pit coal mines in Alberta. And by all available information, the revised proposal by Northback for Grassy Mountain is still an open pit mine. They've just decreased the footprint, and they've said, we really, really promise we'll only use water that comes off of the mountain. It still doesn't address the concerns that many of Albertans have about selenium contamination. Well, it's an advanced project. It's also important to keep in mind that the reason why it's an advanced project is because Brian Jean stepped in and told the AER, by the way, I consider this an advanced project. I hope you do too. I'm paraphrasing a little, but that is the thrust of the letter that he sent to the AER. So it's not like this has happened in a vacuum. It's not like the AER has looked at these projects and said, hey, you know what? They're so far, they've been working since the 50s. They have. Northback hasn't been working since the 50s. Let's be very, very clear about that. They've been working since the 50s. We want to make sure they get their chance to continue their project. Grassy Mountain is an abandoned coal mine. Does it need to be remediated? Yes. Is doing more mining going to be an effective way to remediate it? Many environmental experts say no, because you're just going to redisturb all of that stuff that's settled, and you're going to see more selenium getting into the water supply. So not great there. Which brings us to the early election piece, because Danny was asked about early elections on two different fronts.
Any truth to some of the rumors going around right now that there could be an early election? Why or why not?
Well, we have fixed election dates in this province for a reason, and our fixed election date is set for October 18th of 2027. And the whole reason we have fixed election dates is so people have certainty and can do their planning. That would be one thing. The second thing is we have had hundreds of thousands of newcomers come into the province in the last number of years. And so we're in the middle of an electoral boundary commission that is adding 2 seats. We want to make sure people have proper representation. And I'm not quite sure why everyone is so anxious to rush to an election. The incredible polling I've seen suggests we do very, very well in an early election. And so we've got a mandate that we want to execute over the next 2 years, and we intend to continue doing so.
And this goes back to what I've been saying for quite some time now. The reality is they do have a mandate that they want to continue pursuing. It is a mandate that they weren't elected on. It's one that Danielle Smith refused to campaign on, and particularly the pensions and the provincial police. And if she gives up the reins to power now, if she even runs the risk of giving up the reins to power now, she runs the risk of losing all of that progress, air quotes, that the UCP have made on those and other issues that they didn't campaign on, like the book bans, like the anti-trans policies, like all of these other social rage farming issues that they've used to keep people fired up in their base. She just simply doesn't want to. Why would she let go of that? Why would she give up all of that progress? And secondary to that, everybody needs to keep in mind that with the Alberta Next panel coming up as well, there's going to be much more campaigning that's done on that. Danny's going to tour the province again. You can bet your bottom dollar on it. There's going to be referendum campaigns. She gets to campaign for free for the next year, effectively, on the taxpayer dollar. Why would you give that up and campaign for the UCP? Well, using UCP money. Why would you do that? It just doesn't make any sense. So I have not been a big believer, and I remain unconvinced. But she was also asked about it a second time, and this had to do with Peter Guthrie and the Tory party of Alberta. Their Twitter account is officially defunct. As the Alberta Party. It is now, they are fully committed to the Alberta Tories. And Peter Guthrie talking about their urgency in preparing for an early election.
Guthrie had said they're working, that you folks are working quickly to get their new, or they're working quickly to get their new party up and running, because they're worried that you will try to preempt their organizing by calling a spring election. I know you already talked about that a little bit. Just want to contextualize with this a bit, see what your response is to that.
Well, we have a fixed election date, October 18th of 2027. We have an electoral boundaries commission that is doing their work and going to add 2 new seats to adjust for the fact that we've had hundreds of thousands of newcomers come into our province. And so our intention is to continue to work for the next 2 years on the mandate that we were elected to govern on. I mean, we have fixed election dates for a reason, and we have 4-year mandates for a reason. And so we intend to continue to fulfill our mandate.
So again, Smith is doing everything she can to be like, yeah, no, there's not going to be an early election. And even her expression, I don't know if you caught it. If you didn't, you should rewind and go take a look at it. Even her expression when it was brought up that the Tory party is just rushing to make sure that they are prepared as they possibly can. It was pretty. I don't think she's worried about them. Was what I took out of that expression. That's just my interpretation. Do with it what you will. But continuing with this theme that we've been playing with tonight of starting at the end and working our way to the beginning, let's take a look at what the last question was in the press conference.
Last week, it surfaced through court documents that a former AHS board member was surveyed, photographed, and harassed. He, of course, is a witness in support of former AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos in the lawsuit over healthcare procurement contracts. You'll also recall that my colleague was photographed and harassed last year for her reporting on this. Does it concern you that people involved in this case are being intimidated and harassed?
Well, I know nothing about it, so that'll be a question, I suppose, for the courts.
Do you have anything to say about harassment?
It's before the courts, so I'd rather not comment on it until it gets resolved. Yeah, it's a live, active court case, and so I tend not to comment on those.
The question was, do you condemn the harassment? And Danielle Smith responded with, no, I don't know anything about that, and it's an active court case, so I won't comment on it. It should be pretty easy to say, if harassment occurred, I absolutely condemn it. You put that little if word in front, and all of a sudden everything's safe. And you get to claim the moral high ground because you said that people shouldn't be harassed. But this is where we get into it. And first, we have to start by maybe calling a little bit of bullshit on Danny's claim that she didn't know anything about it. And in order to do that, we've got to go back to November 19th.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Minister of Health said that his minister was, quote, freaked out about the allegations. If the minister was so freaked out, he should have called the RCMP, called the Auditor General, called anyone. And the same deputy said on the record, quote, I definitely know that Marshall was involved on that side, end quote. That's the Premier's former Chief of Staff directly implicated in the procurement of recovery centres. Why has this government refused to tell Albertans which recovery centre contracts benefited their buddy from the CorruptCare scandal?
The Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member from Airdrie Cochrane had way too many tomahawk steaks and specialty drinks to understand that he was making an error in judgment when the minister told him that it was a case of mistaken identity.
Now, there's a lot going on in that clip. And when we first clipped that and sent it out to the ether, the thing that we emphasized was, oh, look, Marshall Smith is getting mentioned in the Alberta legislature again. But it turns out there was what's called a point of order called on that comment by the Premier of Alberta. And I'm going to let the full, it's a long clip show. I'm going to let the full exchange play because it was Peter Guthrie who called the point of order. And he articulates quite well what his concerns were.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order where the Premier made references to comments from an online source. This was from a podcast with virtually no audience, which has been publishing serious threats and baseless accusations against myself, Athana Mentzelopoulos, the former CEO of AHS, and journalist Carrie Tate. It is an extremely disturbing and well-funded operation. What is more troubling, Mr. Speaker, is that the Premier of Alberta has repeated talking points that originated from this source. I find it astonishing that the Premier would lead credence to an outlet that traffics in harassment and intimidation, yet here we are. Mr. Speaker, this conduct falls squarely within 23 HI&J, making allegations without foundation and using language to create disorder. So I would ask that the member apologize and withdraw.
The Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I will indulge the chair to ask, I'm sorry, I did not hear a quote of the language cited. There was a reference that the member opposite believes that the Premier was making. I'm not sure the precise language that the member believes falls in 23 HI&J. I'm happy to speak to that, and perhaps I missed it. There was conversations about what the member opposite ate and drank at different times, clearly matters of debate. Referencing the member opposite was an error at times, which is, I believe, also parliamentary. And without the precise language, I'm afraid I can't speak to exactly what the point was.
I have the blues. I'll be happy to read them to you. The member for Airdrie Cochrane had way too many tomahawk steaks and specialty drinks and understand he was making an error, were the exact words. I think that it's a point of order. I think I think it's yes, it just needs to be withdrawn and apologized for.
Happily, Mr. Speaker, I will withdraw and apologize unreservedly on behalf of the member.
So according to the records in the legislature, Danielle Smith referenced a podcast that Peter Guthrie made some comments about their audience size. Maybe it was cold out, I don't know. Because of the fact that it violated the rules of the legislature to reference that obscure podcast in the way that the Premier did, Dan Williams, on her behalf, apologized and withdrew the comment. So right out of the gates, it seems like maybe Danielle Smith does know a little bit something about the podcasters in question. And to be clear, there's two of them. They have two different shows. One of them does it by himself. The other one, the two of them do it together. And yes, we're going to get into it tonight because it has hit the point where we pretty much have to. So, as Danielle Smith claims she doesn't know anything about anything going on with these harassment claims, there's a couple of points that we just want to highlight as being oddly coincidental. They're very strange. It's very strange. It's a weird coincidence. We're absolutely not saying that there's any proof of any communication, coordination. To be very, very clear, we're not making that claim. It's just some fascinating coincidences that are going on above and beyond the Premier using language that Peter Guthrie identified as originating from that obscure podcast that was harassing him and his family and others, including reporter Carrie Tate, the former CEO of HS, Athanamans Lopoulos. Do with that what you will. That's what Peter Guthrie said. But in order to really, what's going on here? We got to start with going back to the UCP AGM, because on December 1st, one of those podcasters, James DeFiore, tweeted out a picture. And he identifies in that picture, you can see the man with the luxurious hair in the bottom left-hand corner. That's David Wallace, his partner in podcasting. The quote from the tweet: David Wallace tells the story of what it was like walking into the lion's den. There were many enemies there, but many allies as well. Hear his story tonight at 9 p.m. on Blackballed. And then he tagged David Wallace's Twitter account. Now, this is where it starts to get weird, because that picture looked oddly familiar. And if you take a look at the fully uncropped picture, this is what that fully uncropped picture looks like. You can see, again, we have the person that James DeFiore seems to have identified as David Wallace. It certainly matches David Wallace's, as I said, luxurious hair. And there's some other people walking into the UCP AGM. Fairly innocuous, right? Until you look at the source of the picture. Because that's where some people might potentially raise some eyebrows. Because it turns out the source of the picture that James DeFiore used to promote his episode of Blackballed, where he highlighted David Wallace walking into the UCP AGM, came from nowhere other than the Premier's own tweet. This is a tweet from Danielle Smith at the UCP AGM on November 28th. The snow came down hard in Edmonton, but your 2025 UCP AGM is still off to a great start. See you all tonight. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the original source photo of David Wallace walking into the UCP AGM was Danielle Smith. Which is a wild coincidence. And we're not saying it's anything more than a wild coincidence, but it's a wild coincidence. It's wild that somebody who has, back in November, was highlighted by a member of the Legislative Assembly and accused by a member of Legislative Assembly inside of the legislative, the chamber, as being somebody who is harassing many other people. These podcasts were harassing many other people. It's wild that Danielle Smith would choose, of many pictures that I'm sure were available, it's just wild that one of them would happen to have that podcaster in those photos. And it also begs a little bit of a question. How did an Ontario podcaster, who's many people have raised concerns about the nature of their content, and we're going to get into some of it in a sec, how did he get accredited? The David Wallace political dark arts, we haven't been able to find any evidence that there's a media company behind it. It's just a podcast, and that's fine. And there's whole conversations to be had about, let's be clear, the UCP can accredit whoever they want. And they've made it very, very clear, as we saw last episode, in our last episode of 2025, they do enjoy the people who will say very nice things about them. And they will invite them to all of the best rooms. So they can do whatever they want. They can accredit whoever they want. But it's fascinating that David Wallace was accredited as media to attend the UCP AGM. And this is where we get to the big day, December 23rd. Because there were a couple of news stories that broke on December 23rd. I'm going to read some paragraphs from each of them. So, yep, it's a little bit more reading with Nate. This is, by the way, a picture of David Wallace with his media badges on at the UCPG AGM. That's a photo that was taken by Amber Bracken, an independent photojournalist. The article in question was not written, for the record, by everybody who's going to speculate. It wasn't written by Carrie Tate. And the story goes, former AHS board member obtains rare court order alleging intimidation by podcasters. And now I will read. Sandy Edmondstone, who served on the board of Alberta Health Services until January, obtained a rare court order allowing him to search and seize records and electronic devices belonging to two podcasters, David Wallace and James DeFiore, who he alleges have disparaged and harassed him. Those derogatory comments are part of a coordinated campaign funded by someone or some people, Mr. Edmondstone alleges. The search and seizure order is necessary, Mr. Edmondstone successfully argued, to find evidence showing who is bankrolling the podcasters. Mr. Edmondstone alleges that the podcasts are designed to undermine him as a potential witness in the lawsuit former AHS Chief Executive Athana Menzalopoulos fired against the Health Authority and the Alberta government. In the court filings, Mr. Edmondstone said that someone followed him and took photos of him on June 13th and distributed those photos over text messaging. The sender threatened to share the photos with Mr. Edmondstone's wife in an attempt to cause personal strife and acrimony, he alleges. The phone number that sent those pictures was associated with a now defunct X account called the Broke Down AB, which, and I'm editorial inserting here, some of you may remember from the summer, there was a Twitter account that popped up called the Broke Down AB. You see the clever wordplay that they're doing there and how they used all of the graphics from this show. They released a bunch of pictures of Carrie Tate. And there were a lot of articles that were written at the time about stalking of journalists and how that's probably not okay. Anyways, the phone number that sent those pictures was associated with a now defunct X account called @TheBrokeDownAB, Mr. Edmondstone alleges. The same anonymous account had threatened in July to expose Ms. Tate's sources and posted photos of her while she was secretly followed last summer. In addition to authorizing Mr. Edmondstone's bid to seize records, Justice Michael Lema, Lema, of the Court of King's Bench of Alberta also ordered Mr. Wallace and DeFiore to appear before him for potential contempt of court. It's a very big deal. But that's not the only story that was written. There's some other details that can be gleaned, perhaps, out of another story that came compliments of Matthew Black with Post Media. The headline, former AHS board member claims podcasters paid to smear him ahead of Menzalopoulos' testimony. I read now from that story. And this is a quote from the lawyer. It starts with a quote from the lawyer for Mr. Edmondstone, Jordan Bierkos. Fundamentally, we say this is an attack on the court's process if witnesses cannot expect to participate in the justice system without fear of harassment and reprisal, end quote. The November hearing was conducted over two-part over parts of 2 days on an ex parte basis, meaning lawyers for Mintzalopoulos and the government, as well as Wallace and DeFiore themselves, were unaware of the proceedings. Again, quote, I'm satisfied there's enough evidence here to convince me that there's at least a prima facie case that of these gentlemen, at least Mr. Wallace, being in the hire of somebody who's involved in this litigation, end quote, just as Michael Lima said last month in authorizing the order. Bierkos also presented the court with text messages forwarded to Edmundston by an individual described in the court as an associate and former Alberta Attorney General. To be clear, and again, editorializing here, that person is not identified in any of the stories, and it's a safe bet. It's probably not the person you're thinking it is. The text suggested that Edmundston had been surveilled and accused him of having an affair. This is your friend Sandy, one of the messages read, including an image of Edmundston. If my husband was doing this while I had a baby at home, I'd want to know. When I find his wife's number, she will get these, end quote. In an October 13th video, Wallace discussed the supposed affair in more detail and said the revelations were, quote, just step one, I've got a lot more coming for you, end quote. Bierkos said Edmundston denies any infidelity and also noted that he was unmarried, and though he is a parent, his child is not an infant. Bierkos pointed to some of the video comments and surveillance to support his argument that the two had been contracted to target Edmundston. Quote, the conclusion we drew from all of this was there was a group of vendors implicated in the underlying allegations who have now hired a political fixer to engage in a campaign of harassment, bullying, intimidation, and attempts to discredit a known witness in these proceedings, all outside the context of the legal action. Lima indicated in an email through his assistant that the Anton Pillar order was served on December 16th at premises in Coldwater, Ontario and Killaloe, Ontario, which were to be searched by independent solicitors acting on behalf of the court. Both of those stories came out on December 23rd, right before the holiday season. So the breakdown obviously has some overlap here. We've got a little bit of a history that we should probably address once again, just to clear the air, as it were. So who and what are we talking about? Well, these two guys, predominantly, are the two gentlemen who are named in both of these stories and in the order. Now, to be clear, the claims are kind of tested, I guess, in a court of law, because the judge issued the order and ordered the search and seizure of all the electronics and the databases and everything like that. But the final stuff hasn't happened yet. So please bear that in mind as we go through this. We're not making any assertions as to anyone's guilt or innocence. But there is a little bit of an overlap with the breakdown and the saga, aside from the whole. It's very, very clever when people, the breakdown's having a breakdown. Like, do better is all I'm saying. Whoever created that account, not saying who did. Let's start with Mr. Wallace. So for anybody who doesn't know, aside from having fantastic hair, who is David Wallace? David Wallace is a self-described political fixer, and he calls himself a master of the political dark arts. That's the name of his podcast. He's also been implicated in a number of fairly high-profile scandals in Alberta, despite only having technically operated in Alberta for a few years. His main base of operations, from what we understand, is not Alberta. He moved out east quite some time ago after moving here for a short period. But he's been implicated as a figure in a number of scandals, including an alleged plot to entrap Naheed Nenshi when he was mayor, and a further alleged plot to obtain phone records of a journalist who had written a story about a former justice minister allegedly violating COVID restrictions for his wedding. That was a mouthful. Let's go through it again. So the story goes that he was hired, allegedly, to obtain phone records on behalf of a former justice minister, because a reporter wrote a story about the COVID restrictions. And fun fact, allegedly the best man at that wedding was none other than current minister McAllister. He was the best man. Reading from the headline here, video shows UCP whip, because he was the UCP whip at the time, at wedding with 2 children, over 10-person limit. Fun fact. Anyways, according to the media reporting at the time, David Wallace claimed that he'd been hired by Dennis to obtain the phone records of that journalist. We're talking about former Justice Minister Jonathan Dennis, who the breakdown has a long history with as well. Not happy about. We're not going to get into that tonight. Which brings us, all of this brings us to how his path first crossed with the breakdown, because this was a pretty big story. This political fixer, or intrigue, palace intrigue, this political fixer turns over a new leaf, allegedly, and decides to tell his side of the story. And so we wanted to explore that, and an interview was arranged, and an interview did happen. We will play a clip from that interview now. What did that process look like?
Well, the process was really pretty straightforward. Mr. Dennis asked flat out, the only way to solve this case would be to hack the reporter's phone logs. I reiterated to him that it was highly illegal. He said that this was not going to be for public consumption. So at the time, I was looking for Mr. Mraiche for the Plymouth Brethren. That was the job that was brought to me by Alan Hallman and Gerald Chapor. During the course of finding Mr. Mraiche, one of the senior members of the Plymouth Brethren Church in British Columbia, Brad Mitchell from Klondike Lubricants, he had told me that he had access into several Canadian databases, and that they had people inside the carriers. So if there were any numbers I needed run, that he would run them. I put Mr. Dennis's numbers over to Mr. Mitchell, who ran those numbers. I never opened them up. I didn't want to look at them. Again, I told him that they were illegally obtained, and I arranged for him to get the numbers through that source. But basically, these guys already have their comms wired. They have people inside of all the major carriers in Canada.
I'm just going to let Mr. Dennis's version of events speak for itself. Where it got to be a problem for the breakdown, though, was Mr. Dennis did not like. There's a whole thing around that. You can Google it yourself, because I'm not getting into that legally dubious territory tonight. But there is a second piece, because Mr. Wallace went through some hardship, allegedly, after that time period. He had some problems where he was hard for money. He ended up leaving Alberta. Now, there's been all sorts of stories about terrible things that happened during his exit to him and his family. I have no idea as to the accuracy of what has been claimed. It's very vague and nebulous. Also, not getting into that. And he kind of bounced around for a little while on social media, did some commentary. And for quite a while, actually, the breakdown enjoyed a fairly friendly relationship with Mr. Wallace. And I want to be very, very clear. I gave him the full benefit of the doubt. I love a good redemption story. I love a good redemption arc. And so the idea that somebody would be involved with the darkest parts of the political underworld, as it were, not saying that about Dennis, but just Mr. Wallace's his own stories about the things that he's done. I'm just going to take Mr. Dennis right off the screen there, because I don't want to deal with that problem. Do with that what you will. I love a good redemption story. And so the idea that Mr. Wallace had turned a corner and he was trying to do the right thing and get himself into better places. I love that story. I love that idea. I love when people can do better. I love it when people can overcome adversity. I think that should be celebrated. But so there was a positive relationship. However, after the federal election, he suddenly resurfaced his podcast. And he, on one of the episodes of his podcast, he had a very different version than what he provided the breakdown in that interview, the clip of which you just heard.
They wanted me to go after several individuals, one of whom was a former Justice Minister of Alberta, a guy named Jonathan Dennis, who I have no love for. But one thing about Dennis, Now, when the story broke about him wanting the reporter's phone logs, and by the way, those stories broke because Richard Marsh gave all my information to reporters. I had asked him to take the information off my phones that would protect him, but the whole thing went out. So be it. When I accepted a job from Mr. Dennis, it was simply to trace back to see who may have fraudulently claimed that he had too many guests at his wedding during the COVID lockdown, or however you want to put it. Straight business. But Mr. Dennis at the time had an intermediary between us who had, how should I put this, implied to me that he required the phone logs of the reporter. I believed at that time that this man was acting on behalf of Jonathan Dennis with his full knowledge. Recently, maybe 3 months ago, I came to find out that wasn't true and that he had gone off the reservation and gone a step too far. Jonathan Dennis never implicitly asked me face to face or in writing to get the reporter's phone logs. This individual who was employed by him did. And from what I understand, this person took their own action, maybe thinking that's what he wanted. So, doesn't make Dennis a nice guy, that's for sure. But in that case, he's not guilty.
Now, in our interpretation, that's just a marked deviation from the version of events that he provided to us in the interview that we did a couple of years prior. This forced us into the position of now not knowing which version of events that Mr. Wallace had presented was the accurate one. And so the breakdown did the responsible thing at the time, and we provided both clips, and we said, hey, you know what? I'm paraphrasing. You can go find the thread if you want. You know what? We acted in good faith. All of a sudden, the story's changed. We're just going to apologize to anybody who was hurt. If anybody was hurt by any misrepresentations that were or weren't made, we don't know, because we now have two different versions on video, and we don't know how to reconcile that. So on the behalf of everybody involved with the show, if anybody was hurt, we unreservedly apologize for that. It was never that we were dealing to the best of our knowledge in good faith. We've left that episode up because removing it feels like it would almost be removing evidence, which is not something that we want to do. We haven't had any demands to have that episode removed. So up it stays for the time being. After that podcast went up, a bunch of different things started to happen. Mr. Wallace started to comment more and more on Alberta politics. And he also claimed to have been hired by benefactors who had extremely deep pockets. He also claimed to have contacted another podcaster, this is James DeFiore, and provided him with information early in 2025 as well. Since then, he has taken to his podcast, as well as James DeFiore's podcast, in order to, let's say, cast sometimes, if we look at the reading based on what we just saw from the gentleman who filed the legal orders, demonstrably false information on that podcast. They claimed that Mr. Edmonstone had a baby and a wife and was cheating on her. And according to the sworn affidavit, as reported in that story, that's simply not true. There was a lot of other nasty, we'll say, comments that were directed towards former AHS CEO Thana Menzalopoulos, Globe and Mail reporter Carrie Tate. They came up with all these fun nicknames for people, one of them being Ticket Boy Petey and Tomahawk Tracy, referencing the food that was eaten allegedly in the skyboxes for the games that Pete Guthrie attended, which Pete Guthrie has said he attended games. And there's a whole other conversation to be had about that. But it didn't just stop there, because they also, Mr. Wallace has on many occasions had some very strong thoughts about me. from this tweet in November of this year, responding to somebody. He said, "You're a broken record and wrong. It's Carrie Tate and Nate Pike who are criminals. Good night." To be clear, I'm not a criminal. That is a false statement. That I have no criminal record. I am not committing any crimes that I am aware of. That is a demonstrably false statement. So do with that what you will, because a lot of the episodes have since been removed. Some of the episodes have since been removed. Fascinatingly, most of the ones that remain up are the ones that do a very, very good job of denigrating me. And that's okay. And we're going to talk about why I don't care so much about that right now, because now we have to talk about James Di Fiore. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. He and Wallace put up multiple episodes that made a number of claims that were completely without any basis as to why I and The Breakdown originally pursued the procurement scandal that we were the first to break the story in 2023. We were the first to do all of the little yarn things that I'm getting sued $6 million for. And they've speculated, I'll say, a great deal as to my motives. And this is not accurate. Anybody who follows the show, anybody who knows me knows that it has nothing to do with my love for my former employer, Alberta Health Services. A little bit of cleverness going on there. It has to do with I have values, and I have a podcast, and those two things mean that every once in a while we run into something that I have to call bullshit on, because otherwise it would be a failure of my own principles. So that's what that is. It's really, that's all. That's it. But the aspersions and the conjecture and the speculation as to what my motives were got me quite, I was concerned. I didn't know what was going on, because at this point, when it all started up, I was still looking at Mr. Wallace as somebody that I thought had taken, again, that redemption arc. So it was very, very strange to me. And I received a couple of text messages from Mr. Wallace that were confusing, I'll say. We can leave it at that for now. But in particularly with Mr. Di Fiore, and again, full disclosure, there was a brief period of time where I was affiliated with an organization called Crier Media. It was run by somebody that I do not affiliate with anymore, because I did not like how they did business, because I don't do this for the business. And Mr. Di Fiore was part of that network, with the Crier Media Network. And do that which will. Our paths crossed, not in any substantive way. I was a guest on one of his episodes where I bailed fairly quickly because it became apparent that his whole goal was just to eat as many edibles as he could on the air. And that's just not my jam. I'm too old for that. But with his commentary becoming increasingly erratic, and in no way based in the reality, and increasingly speculating on my motivations, in July of 2025, I made the decision to make public a document that was publicly posted on CanLII, which, for anybody who isn't familiar, it's an online database of legal decisions. This document was a decision by the Ontario Review Board from May of 2025. It detailed how, on February 26, 2025, James Di Fiore was found not guilty on account of mental disorder for criminal harassment and failure to comply. And what he failed to comply with was contacting somebody that he was not supposed to be contacting. The criminal harassment was the mother of his children. And this occurred, according to this document on CanLII, from April 2023 to charges being laid for the last time in December of 2025. The criminal case includes claims by Di Fiore that he, quote, had been hearing voices in the bushes near his house and seeing people surrounding his house earlier that day. He believed that these people had guns and that they were planning on going to his house the next day to harm him, end quote. He also claimed to have contacted CSIS and the FBI and advised his ex-partner that, quote, a CSIS team would be coming to remove them so that the children would be safe, end quote. The rest of the document details a very troubled history with crime, drugs, and inability to hold down jobs or finish educational programs. It also details how in 2023 he required an admission to hospital for auditory hallucinations, and that this admission actually preceded the events for which he ended up being charged, which is to say that it happened before them. Even at the hearing, he was claiming that he had been hired by a U.S. firm to work in AI and was paid exclusively in cash and had to travel across the border regularly for this job. But the board could find no evidence supporting those claims. As per the document, the hospital that assessed Mr. Di Fiore said that the hospital submits that Mr. Di Fiore poses a significant threat to the safety of the public, and that a detention order with community living in approved accommodation, reporting no less than once every 4 weeks, and conditions to abstain from substances and commit to random testing, and that there be contact with the victim only with her written revocable consent or pursuant to a family court order is the necessary and appropriate disposition to manage the risk at this time. The hospital also endorses including travel passes to the U.S. only with the week prior approval of the hospital and an itinerary presented 1 week before travel. The Attorney General, so this is because the court case he was found not guilty by reason of the mental health issues that he was experiencing. The Attorney General weighed in on the recommendations from the hospital. Counsel for the Attorney General, Ms. Dufort, indicated her support of the hospital recommendation and the terms and conditions of the detention order, with some added recommendations for the conditions relating to contact with the victim. Perhaps most notably, the counsel for Mr. Di Fiore, so this is Mr. Di Fiore's own lawyer, Mr. Musterman, also indicated, Miss Musterman, also indicated her support of the hospital recommendation and suggestions of Ms. Dufort in relation to contact with the victim. So, to be clear, he was assessed by a hospital. The hospital determined that there were safety concerns for the public. They made some recommendations. The Attorney General, or counsel for the Attorney General, agreed with those recommendations, and Mr. Di Fiore's own lawyer also agreed with those recommendations based on the document that we've got from the CanLII website, which at later dates Mr. Di Fiore has confirmed is an authentic document. Ultimately, the review board expressed that if Mr. Di Fiore engaged with treatment, he stood an excellent chance of recovery, but also noted that he had not at that time engaged in meaningful efforts to engage with treatment. And as such, the board ruled. Having considered all of the evidence tendered at the hearing and the joint submissions of the parties on this issue, the board finds that Mr. Di Fiore poses a significant threat to the safety of the public as defined in section 672.5401 of the Criminal Code of Canada, and as further defined by the Supreme Court of Canada in Winco v. British Columbia. Mr. Di Fiore has a likely diagnosis of schizophrenia, and the extent to which his abuse of substances contributed to his psychosis remains unclear at this time and requires further investigation. While he was experiencing psychosis, Mr. Di Fiore repeatedly harassed his ex-spouse, causing her obvious extreme psychological harm and fear for her safety. Her victim impact statement leaves no doubt as to the extent of the harm caused to her. Mr. Di Fiore has yet to truly engage in rehabilitative treatment, given that he has not yet had any opportunity to work with the members of his treatment team, including his psychiatrist, whom he has only met once for the purposes of preparation of the risk assessment. This hearing was held on April 22nd, 2025. The ruling that I just read from was issued on May 2nd, 2025. James Di Fiore's first episode suggesting a grand media conspiracy behind the coverage of MH Care procurement scandals was on June 15th, 2025, only slightly more than a month after that ruling was issued. In that episode, he cast aspersions on the reporting of Carrie Tate and myself by name and claimed that he had been investigating, ostensibly with David Wallace, for approximately a month and a half. There's a video clip of that episode where he says that he had been given materials by David Wallace a month and a half prior. Now, again, we haven't seen those materials. I can't speak to the accuracy of the timelines that Mr. Di Fiore spoke to in his episode, But we do have that video. Reasonable people could interpret this as suggesting that David Wallace approached James DeFiore at a time when significant stress was going on in his life and when the Ontario Review Board determined him to be a threat to public safety. Since the breakdown has made this public, Mr. DeFiore has been extremely dedicated to attacking me personally and quite literally claiming that I am the biggest enemy to mental health in circulation. He has also launched a complaint against my employer, a complaint against me to my employer, who has nothing to do with any of this. And he has also launched a complaint against my governing body, one of my professional bodies. Both have been dismissed, and rightfully so. I want to be clear. I am deeply saddened by Mr. DeFiore's role in this whole fiasco. And I'm saddened that his role has now led him to be the subject of a rare order searching and seizing his electronics. That he now has to appear before a judge to convince the judge that he didn't, to convince the judge, and quoting, that he didn't interfere with the administration of justice by deterring, harassing, molesting, or influencing a prospective witness. That's as per the Globe and Mail article. I also want to be clear about something else. Supporting mental health includes supporting accountability. It means empowering people and supporting people to take responsibility for their diagnosis. And I understand this very, very well. I've been very public on the show, but a few years back, I had to take a year off because my mental health was doing unbelievably bad. Coming out of the COVID pandemic and some very, very bad calls from my work as a paramedic, I had to take some time off. I had to take responsibility for myself and for my mental health in order to get better. And because I did, and the support of a whole bunch of amazing people, not the least of which are my family, I was able to come out the other end of that. And I'm doing better now than I have ever been in my entire life. But you have to take ownership of those things. There are very real allegations that James DeFiore has a track record of not taking responsibility for his own mental health, and the inability to do that has caused real harm to the people that he loves. Those are not my words. Those are the words from the court assessment off of Canley. He has been labeled a threat to public safety and now faces significant, potentially criminal matters in Alberta. Additionally, a warrant for his arrest on a civil matter that has gone unaddressed is now circulating around the internet. He's also claimed that he's not being paid for the work that he does with his podcast, Blackballed. David Wallace, on the other hand, has claimed to be paid extremely well. In fact, in the wake of this story, he posted a now deleted video where he talked about the fact that he got a bonus for the work that he's done for his role in this scandal. David Wallace also claims to have infinite legal resources. I want to state this unequivocally and for the record. In the same way that I had to issue an apology based on the inconsistencies in the stories that Mr. Wallace publicly stated on both of those videos that you saw earlier, I really, really hope that James is getting the help that he needs. I'm not going to publish the whole, there's a link, it's a public document, whatever. I'm not going to do the whole putting all the pages up of the ruling. But one thing that is very clear in the review board is that it highlighted very clearly his love for his children, that he wants to be the best father that he can be. I sincerely hope that if the recent court order hasn't pushed him to do so already, he gets the help he needs so that he can be there for them. James has spent the better part of a year trying to drag my name through the mud. I don't care. And that's why, despite multiple blatantly defamatory statements that he's made about me, I haven't launched any legal action at him. I haven't engaged with him directly, and I don't have any intention to do so. And I'll, again, issued the request that I made in July of this year. Please be very careful how you engage with him. And for the love of God, do not harass this man. There's no value in saying mean things to him. I appreciate that people are trying to defend me. I appreciate that people are trying to defend some of the other people that Mr. DeFiore has said unpleasant things about. But it's punching down. And that's one of the things that we do not do at this show. As for David Wallace, he seems to think that he's a mercenary who will do anything and get his hands dirtier than anyone if he's paid to do so. I sincerely hope that doesn't include intentionally or unintentionally weaponizing a man navigating complex mental health issues. I'm not saying that he did. But I have very reasonable personal concerns, I believe, that James DeFiore's involvement in this scandal has only brought him more hardship than he needs. And as for whoever hired Wallace, if it is, as Edmundston's lawyers claim, Burkos pointed to some of the video comments. Again, Burkos is Mr. Edmundston's lawyer. Pointed to some of the video comments and surveillance to support his argument that two had been contracted to target Edmundston. The conclusion we drew from all of this is a quote, the conclusion we drew from all of this is there is a group of vendors implicated in the underlying allegations who have now hired a political fixer to engage in a campaign of harassment, bullying, intimidation, and attempts to discredit a known witness in these proceedings, all outside of the context of legal action. If there's any truth to that claim by Sandy Edmundston's lawyer, it is not unreasonable to be concerned about all of the other people that David Wallace and James DeFiore have spent the better part of a year publicly denigrating. And it should tell you everything that you need to know about the state of politics in this province and why it is so important that people do not bow down to intimidation. It is so important that people do not bow down to fear tactics. And if there is any truth to the claims that somebody, a group of vendors, end quote, would hire somebody to target people who reportedly are trying to do the right thing with vitriol and, quite frankly, in some of those episodes, straight up emotional abuse. It's so critically important that we don't back down. It's so critically important that we don't back down from those kinds of tactics. It's so critically important that we stand up and we support the people who are being targeted. And this has been a hell of a tightrope for me personally to try to walk. Because on one hand, I see the way that James DeFiore is speaking about me. He's speaking about other people who are in this vortex of this procurement scandal. And it's not right. I really do hope that James gets the help that he needs. I really hope that he's getting it already. And I really hope that the people that have been the targets of the vitriol from these two men know that they have, at the very least, my support. And I would argue the support of a good number of people in the province. But it still leaves us with one question. If the audience for Wallace and DeFiore is as small as Tory party leader Peter Guthrie claims it is, I'm tempted to play the clip again, but I won't. How did the Premier of Alberta come across it to apparently make enough of a reference to it that an apology was forced in the Alberta legislature and her comments were retracted? And that's the first show of the year. Oh, boy. I'm going to be getting emails. So many emails and messages and probably some threats. But we stand on principle here at The Breakdown, and we will continue to do so. A couple things I want to plug real quick before we call it a night, as I might make it under the 2-hour mark. I'm very proud of myself. There's two things I want to plug. First of all, there is the editorial. I'm very proud of this editorial. I've never written an editorial before, so it's kind of a big deal for me. You can whatever it as much as you want, but it's a whole editorial about the current state of the healthcare system and how we got to where we are right now. It's available on the Breakdown Substack, which is easily searched, and it's a bit of a longer read, but I included some pictures. I find the pictures make it easier for me to get through things. That is, for the record, an AI-generated image. There are no planes that have actually crashed into hospitals in Alberta. It's a metaphor. It'll make sense if you read the Substack. But if you haven't, make sure that you subscribe and do all the things on the Substack, because that's where we're trying to do more of the written commentary, sometimes journalism that we do here at The Breakdown. But the other thing that I want to plug, I'm so excited for this, because the recall thing, there's been this little scandal that's been a brewing. And to make the long story short, there's some chicanery, some questions, some questionable not campaigning that's going on in Lethbridge East in the recall of a certain UCP elected official. And it's very strange because somebody filed for a recall and then ghosted everybody. And there's no discernible campaigning that's going on to recall this MLA. And there's been some questions and concerns as to the connections and the legitimacy of the intent, I'll say. All of this has been largely investigated by a Lethbridge journalist. Her name is Alexandra Node. We got her on the show. We're going to be dropping that episode on Wednesday. And our Patreon supporters will get access to it tomorrow. But we're going to be dropping that show on Wednesday. It is a fascinating conversation. And it is so, oh man, Alberta politics, I swear. It's like an episode of House of Cards, or it's not The West Wing. I would so desperately love it to be The West Wing, but it's not. There's all these twists and these turns and these strange things that happen. It's wild, but it's quite the little chat. And Alexandra was very, very nice to indulge that. So watch for that episode on Wednesday. Hoping to record another conversation with it's going to be spicy. It's going to make some people angry, I think, which may be our raison d'etre in 2026, if this episode is any indication. But we're going to be talking about healthcare. We're going to be talking about the healthcare crisis. We're going to be talking about the underlying issues of the healthcare crisis above and beyond the Substack there, with somebody who actually has the experience and depth and breadth of knowledge in regards to medicine and policy. I'm going to keep their name a secret for now. It's spoiler, it's not immigrants that caused the healthcare problems. It's not. So yeah, there's the two big plugs for that. Want to thank everybody who has tuned in tonight. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, love it if you left a little review and the stars and all of that good thing. That's the first big plug. Second big plug, everybody who didn't get the Breakdown merch that they wanted for Christmas. I know some people did, but I'm sure some people didn't. Our store is still up, and it will remain up for the foreseeable future, thanks to the wonderful folks at Oddities. They do all the heavy lifting. They take care of everything, which is fantastic. And you can find it at www.thebreakdownab. Very important to have the in the front and the AB in the middle. Thebreakdownabmerch.ca. You get your hoodies. You get your all of the things. The toques, the hats. There's much more than what's on the screen right here. You can get all of that there. The other things I have to plug is we do absolutely still have our Patreon page. And if you like the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your amount every month. You can give a little something to help us keep finding the documents, doing the FOIPs, all of that good stuff. And we're trying to expand. We did a thing in December, and it was delightful, where we had like a little Patreon exclusive online thinger. And the feedback was very positive, and way more people showed up than I thought were going to. So we're going to do more of those in the new year. But also our Patreon supporters do get access to all of our interview episodes that aren't live, because I don't have a time machine, and doing the live ones early would be hard. But our patrons do get access to the early access to the interview episodes. So there's that too. There's some value for your money, and there's some perks if you sign up at various different levels. If you're not down for the regular commitment, then you can also send us an e-transfer at info@thebreakdownab.ca of your choosing. And I think that's what I got. I think that's just about everything. I feel like I'm forgetting something though. I wonder what that could possibly be.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
There it is. Oh, I will be worried the day that gets old for me. I will be. But it's not today, and I don't think it's happening anytime soon. I want to thank everybody who, again, listened to the show, everybody who's in the chat. It's my favorite thing to do, go through the chat after the show. These very intense episodes make it hard to get into it. So I'm going to read it as soon as I get off air, but thank you everybody who showed up for that. We're going to be doing live shows every Sunday, interview episodes on Wednesdays for the next little bit. Trying to find a rhythm or routine, if you will. So there's that. Thank you all. I hope everybody had a reasonable holiday season, whatever holiday you observe. If it's just a day off from work, that's okay too. But I hope everybody had a good time and is recharged, because with the separation petition kicking off, and my God, the Rebels started a new website to support it. It's going to be a shit show, folks. We're here for it. We're going to stay here for it. So in the meantime, and in between time, take care of each other. And as always, keep the conversation going.